So, here we are at the torch, and I'm going to demonstrate how to do a few different types of glass eyes. First I'll show two types of eyes on a mandrel, and then I'll show a really simple small eye on a punty. And if you are not yet familiar with Lampwork, I suggest checking out my first introductory Lampwork tutorial, which is making a basic dot bead part 1. Okay, so these are my glasses. I don't want to burn out my retinas. Gotta turn on the gas. Gas and oxygen are on. So, first I turn on the propane, just a little bit, light the torch. The torch that I'm using is a Bobcat from Glass Torch Technologies in Pennsylvania, and I really like using this torch and being able to do a lot of fine detailed work with it. Okay. First is an on-mandrel, simple, basic eye. No threads, no canes, just the sclera, which is the white of the eye, the outline of the iris and the iris itself, the colored center, and then the black pupil in the middle. So first I'm heating my rod. Hey Internet! How are you? Alright. So now I've got enough molten glass to make one small glass eye. And I'm heating my mandrel. I like using shorter mandrels a lot of the time. So now this is a sufficient gather. I'm going to just let that drip on, and I bring it back into the flame, and I'm winding the steel rod away from me, which is pulling the molten glass onto the steel mandrel. And now I'm just trying to marver the glass a little bit with heat and gravity to give the sclera, the base white bead, a wider footprint on the mandrel. And I'm trying to keep it turning at an even rate, and I'm holding it outside of the flame right now so that it will cool down a little bit quickly, also because it's really cool to see how the glass goes from clear to opaque as it cools down. Now, for the outline of the iris, I start heating up a rod of black glass. Now, when applying colors to the base bead for the iris and pupil of an eye, it's important to know that as the glass is melted into the surface, it'll spread out a lot. So if you want an iris that's this big, you can apply a dot that's this big, and it'll spread out as it's heated and as it melts flat. So because I'm not making a gather, I'm just applying this spot on the surface. I don't have to heat up as much glass as I did before. All the while, I've been sure to keep this white bead warm in the flame so that it doesn't cool down and crack. So now I just touch the two together and pull them apart in the flame. I melt the glass rod away from the bead, and you can see I've just applied this small dot there, but as I heat it, it's going to expand quite a bit. Also, it's important to keep in mind that as you add more colors to the dots, so there's the black outline of the iris, then there's going to be the green iris, and then the black pupil. Every time I add another layer of color, it's going to cause the layer at the bottom to expand even more as well, to have a to take up more surface area. And we're working from the core of the bead outward. so the smallest dot in the center, the pupil, is going to be applied last. Right now, though this is a black dot on the surface, it's not going to be entirely visible. It'll just be seen as an outline because now I'm going to cover it with the green of the iris. And working very slowly and carefully, I just tried to apply a really small amount of green, and now if you want an even ring around the iris, it's very important to try to center the color of the iris itself on top. Then when it melts in, it should have a black line around the edge that's of a consistent thickness. Here, you can also sort of control that a little bit as you're melting the color in. And as the glass is flowing, you can also hold it in different ways, so the glass will flow in different directions with gravity. Now, lastly, I'm heating up. It's difficult to see how this looks right now. When it cools down more, that green is going to become a bit lighter, and it'll be a starker contrast of all the colors. Heating up a black rod just to apply a black pupil. And I want to make sure that this bead isn't hotter than this rod, but that this stays warm, because if it cools down too quickly, thermal shock may cause it to crack. I say it like this because I don't know if you've seen the other videos that I did so far, but I say it in every one. It's an important thing to remember, especially when you get started doing this. There's so many things to think about at once. Keeping this warm, keeping this spinning, keeping this spinning. So, it's a lot of stuff to think about sometimes. When I apply the very tiny dot of the pupil in the center, I try to keep the tip of the rod at a point, so that it's very fine, and then I only need to touch a very little bit, and this, like all of the other dots that I applied on the eye before it, will expand a lot. This is a basic eye bead. And as that green cools, I'm going to heat it up again, you can see the contrast between all of the colors. And this will look pretty different when it cools down entirely, because that light green will be a lot brighter, a lime color. Okay, so you get the gist of it. That's a basic bead on a mandrel, basic eye bead on a mandrel, and ideally the iris would be even a little bit smaller on the sclera, because if you're going to set this in a socket for a doll or a puppet, you have to consider how the corners of the eye have more of the surface area of the sclera, and sometimes if these are set in sockets where it's all iris and not a lot of sclera, it's difficult to sculpt the rest of the skull around it because it's sort of vacant, missing. Okay, so first basic on mandrel. Number 2. Let's encase a bubble. A bubble!